There are moments in love that seem insignificant. A glance, a smile, a gentle embrace, yet they carry the quiet power to leave an indelible mark. A simple hug, when offered with true presence, can make her heart echo with warmth for the entire day, perhaps for many days after. We often underestimate these fleeting moments, mistaking them for mere gestures of social courtesy. But in truth, a hug is a form of nonverbal dialogue, where emotion, energy, and presence speak louder than words. The question is not, how tightly should you hold her? But rather, how can she feel understood, cherished, and unable to forget that moment? Surprisingly, the answer lies in a philosophy over 2,000 years old, Stoicism. Not a rigid code of conduct, but a way of being, a mindset that teaches us to be fully present in every act, even in a single mindful embrace. 1. Hugging as a conscious act. In modern life, we often breeze past small gestures without pausing to reflect on their deeper meaning. A handshake, a glance, or a hug, what we assume to be simple social customs, can become gateways to connection and empathy when carried out with intention. A hug is not a tactic, nor a tool for getting something from someone else. It is presence itself, a quiet but powerful expression of the spirit you bring forth. For the Stoic, attitude is central to every action. They do not act to impress. They do not behave to manipulate. They act from an inner place, where reason, composure, and awareness form the core. The hug is no exception. When a Stoic embraces, it is not to complete a social routine. They regard it as a moral act, deliberate, flowing from the responsibility to create a moment that is both safe and real. The hug may seem small, but the attitude behind it reveals who you are. In daily life, people often hug out of instinct, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes by habit. But a hug without presence carries no feeling. In contrast, when we learn to hug as an intentional act, an expression of conscious care, even a brief embrace can shift the emotional state of both people. This is where Stoicism reveals its depth. Through absolute attention to the present and the power to transform any moment into a mirror of inner discipline. A hug, if given reflexively, lacks depth. But if it arises from the understanding that each contact is a chance to build connection, then the hug becomes a symbol of someone living deliberately. In Stoicism, nothing is random if it falls within the reach of reason. A hug is a choice, not a reflex, and the Stoic chooses to express themselves in a way that reflects their character. Calm, unmoved by impulse, but full of empathy. There's a common misconception that Stoics are cold, distant, emotionless. The truth is the opposite. They do not suppress emotions. They train to master them, to avoid being swept away when emotions surge. In doing so, they become more present and authentic than most. In the embrace, the Stoic is not driven by insecurity or governed by expectations. They do not hug to take or to be accepted, but simply to share the peace they've cultivated within. The difference lies in intention. Most people hug to gain attention, affection, or to be polite. But when a hug comes from a place free of demands, it carries a wholly different energy. It is the energy of inner maturity, a calmness that makes others feel safe without knowing why. And this is the deeper aim of Stoicism: to become someone others can trust, simply because you are fully yourself, clearly, solidly, and without pretense. The hug of a Stoic is a gesture of giving without expecting return. It does not come from a need to be loved, but from a commitment to live virtuously, to act in line with core values. When they hug, they do not let emotion override reason. They are aware of where their hands are, the pressure of their body, the rhythm of their breath, and how the other person responds. They notice every detail, not to control, but to honor the moment. This attitude turns a small act into something profound, not because the other person feels loved, but because they feel seen. When you embrace someone with full presence, you speak, without words, "I am here. I hear you. I honor you." These are truths that language often fails to convey. That is why a hug, when given with awareness, can leave a lasting imprint. A woman may forget what you said, forget what you are, but she'll remember exactly how it felt to be hugged by someone who was truly present. No technique, no psychological tricks, just your honesty and your alignment with your own values make the hug unforgettable. And from this, we see that the strength of a hug doesn't come from muscles, but from one's way of being. The Stoic man does not seek to control others through his embrace, but controls himself through every movement, every breath, every pause. He is not someone who knows how to make women feel special by memorizing tricks, but someone who creates a safe space where she can simply be herself. When each hug becomes a moral act, an expression of emotional discipline and conscious presence, then no action is trivial. Every contact, however brief, becomes a chance to display character, dignity, and regard for others. And this is why Stoicism, though ancient, remains fiercely alive in our modern world, where true presence is one of the rarest gifts we can offer. When people think of a hug, they often see it as a display of emotion, a way to show affection, comfort, or closeness. But few ask, what gives a hug the power to be remembered? Is it technique, the length of the hold, the intimacy between two people? These factors may matter, but what truly defines the quality and depth of a hug is the inner state of the one offering it. Mindset cannot be seen, but it can be felt. It's not found in the outer gesture, but in the internal posture that accompanies it. And this is where the Stoic distinguishes himself. He does not act from impulse or unconscious habit. He lives with intention, in thought, in choice, in how he shows up to the world. The hug, though simple, is where this level of intention becomes visible. In Stoic philosophy, man is called to discern what lies within his control and what does not. From there, he invests only in what he can govern, with his thoughts, his actions, his responses. A practicing Stoic, when embracing someone, is not driven by fear of rejection, anxiety over the other's reaction, or hidden desires to gain something in return. Instead, his focus rests on one thing: doing the act rightly, consciously, and fully. Living deliberately is different from acting hastily. It's not about speed or volume, but about clarity of purpose in every moment. When a man embraces a woman, if he is passive, he hugs because he feels he should, or because emotion compels him without deeper awareness. But a man who lives deliberately hugs not out of pressure, but as a conscious act of presence and respect. This requires profound inner discipline, the very pursuit of Stoicism, not to perfect the skill of hugging, but to cultivate inner mastery, where every action mirrors one's moral values. A man who lives deliberately is not led by insecurity. He's not trying to prove anything, nor seeking validation. He embraces because he knows it's a way to be truly present, to offer space where others feel seen, accepted, and safe. And this form of presence is not rigid control. On the contrary, it is flexible, grounded in strength. A person with this mindset knows a hug isn't always necessary. He reads the moment, senses the energy, and responds accordingly. He does not impose, does not force, but neither does he shy away if the moment calls for connection. This brings true freedom. Freedom from emotional turbulence, from reactive living. The Stoic does not aim to control others, but to master himself, to be a stable force in relationship. When you hug from this steadiness, it radiates. No need for grand words, no need to prove. Just be there, completely. This builds trust not from appearances, but from the safety that inner strength brings. In a world of rushed and shallow interactions, the ability to be fully present is rare and precious. A hug from someone who lives deliberately is nothing like one from someone who does not. The difference is not in technique, but in the settled energy within, a stillness free from need, fear, or expectation. Then, the hug becomes a vehicle for strength, a silent language that holds another without words. The true power of a hug lies in the quality of the person giving it, and that quality cannot be faked. An anxious man may learn to hug tightly, skillfully, but if he is riddled with fear, control, or the need to be noticed, a woman will sense it. By contrast, a man who lives deliberately needs no performance. His calm presence alone makes the embrace unforgettable. Stoicism emphasizes becoming, not performing. And nowhere is that more true than in a hug. When a man embraces from the mindset of one who accepts all outcomes, he's no longer bound by the other's response. He doesn't hug to be loved back. He hugs because that act reflects who he is in that moment. This is the highest form of freedom, to act without attachment and still act with kindness, connection, and truth. Living deliberately is not easily attained, but it is within reach of all. It begins with small things, attending to your breath while speaking, how you walk into a room, how you make physical contact. Over time, as self-awareness deepens, even unconscious acts like a hug become deeply meaningful. And in that shift, we not only change how we hug, we change who we are. A hug from someone who lives deliberately offered something unforgettable. The sense that they know who they are, they know what they're doing, and they need nothing more than to share themselves honestly. That's why some people can embrace you once and stay in your memory forever. 2. Mastering stillness, inner strength, revealed through silence. In modern life, people are increasingly obsessed with filling space. They fill silence with noise, time with activity, and distance with words. Yet, in our effort to make everything complete, we often lose one of the most powerful forms of communication: intentional silence. In an embrace, silence should not be seen as absence. It is the subtle space where true connection unfolds. From the Stoic point of view, stillness is not merely the absence of sound. It is a state of disciplined mind, free from confusion, from possessiveness, from the need to perform. It is one of the highest expressions of inner power, because only those who have trained their inner steadiness can be fully present in silence without the urge to do something. And in the act of embracing, this silence becomes the invisible medium through which real emotion travels. A hug without stillness easily becomes a surface gesture, a reflexive formality, a social step in a meeting. But a hug, given with conscious silence, conveys something words cannot. The person being held doesn't feel merely touched, but enters a space where they can be wholly themselves, unguarded, unforced, simply present. This is where silence becomes a language without words. In Stoic philosophy, mastering speech is one of the fundamental lessons of self-control. Speech must be measured, because the fewer words we use, the more we can listen and observe. When applied to the embrace, we realize that it is silence, not speech, that makes room for subtle signals, heartbeat, breath, the tension or relaxation of the body, to speak in place of words. The Stoic knows that silence is strength, not weakness. To remain silent while near another, especially in the vulnerability of a hug, requires overcoming the impulse to do something to ease the discomfort. This demands a degree of self-command beyond emotion, because emotion always urges action. Yet a mind disciplined through inner rigor will choose inaction, not hurried, not evasive, just fully present. And so, the silent embrace does not impose. It expects nothing in return. It simply creates space for connection to arise naturally, without force. In that space, a woman can sense the man's inner steadiness. She doesn't need him to say, "You can trust me." His silence is the proof. The silent moment in a hug is like the pause between two notes, a space where emotion is no longer shaped by sound, but led by stillness. In the emotional realm, stillness is precious. It gives time to feel, to listen, to recognize what's truly happening inside. When a man embraces without urgency or restlessness, he signals that nothing needs to be done. Only presence is needed. And in that stillness, real emotion is released. Wordless moments, held with awareness, become a spiritual refuge for both. No speech, no elaborate gestures, just mutual acceptance through complete presence, expressed through meaningful silence. This stands in stark contrast to today's world, where every gap is filled with words, expressions, and actions. But if we look closely, it's the lack of space that makes relationships shallow. The Stoic's silence is not distance. It's space given to the other. In an embrace, it shows respect. I won't push you to feel. I'll hold space for whatever you do feel. It is a refined humility, born from the realization that the strongest presence isn't in what we do, but in our capacity to do nothing and still remain grounded. From a neurological view, silence triggers a unique activation in the parasympathetic nervous system. In the absence of noise, the body shifts to rest and connection. This means silence not only feels emotionally safe, it also creates biological calm, making the other feel physically secure. This is the invisible gift the Stoic, through self-mastery, can offer the one they hold. In truth, silence in a hug is not inaction. It is a highly active inner posture. It is the result of emotional discipline, mental control, and energetic awareness. It requires no complex technique, yet is one of the hardest things to achieve in a world addicted to distraction and afraid of being forgotten. Thus, when a man embraces with full silence, the hug becomes an unspoken message. I have learned to do nothing, so you can be yourself in my arms. It is a feeling words cannot mimic, and why such a simple hug becomes unforgettable. In every human interaction, eye contact, speech, touch, we transmit energy. Whether consciously or not, our inner state is always felt by others, especially in moments of physical closeness, like a hug. This is why the real difference between a shallow embrace and a memorable one lies not in form, but in the silence of the one giving it. In Stoicism, stillness is one of the clearest signs of self-governance and a reflection of unwavering inner life, a core trait every Stoic seeks to cultivate. The Stoic doesn't seek outer quiet as escape, but builds inner stillness as foundation. That stillness is not passive or unresponsive. It's the result of rigorous training toward emotional stability, mental clarity, and acceptance of reality as it is. When someone hugs with a quiet mind, they do not act from fear of judgment, nor attempt to steer the other's response, nor let emotion dictate how they touch. Every motion reflects deep understanding. I can be present without control. That presence in silence is the signature of a mind unmoved by others' expectations or reactions. When a man maintains inner steadiness in an embrace, a woman senses something different. Not pursuit, not conquest, but rest. A space with no demands, no pressure, no conflict. That's what makes the hug memorable. Not technical flair, but a mindset untouched by fleeting emotion. In Stoicism, silence is not coldness or detachment. On the contrary, it allows one to connect without losing oneself. When the mind is not tangled in fear of failure or craving success, one attends more deeply to reality, to one's own feelings and those of the other. That's when sensitivity and awareness emerge. A hug from such a mindset adjusts its length and strength, not by script, but by deep listening. Modern neuroscience confirms that emotional steadiness influences the nervous system of the other. When someone stays relaxed, breathing steadily, and not tensed, they help regulate the other's emotion through touch. A hug from a calm soul lowers cortisol, the stress hormone, in the recipient and boosts oxytocin, the hormone of trust and bonding. This explains why a hug from an anxious person leaves awkwardness, while a silent hug from a still mind leaves healing. The man with inner quiet is not just physically present, he's mentally present. He doesn't think about the outcome, isn't caught up in image, isn't playing a role. He is there as himself, peaceful, grounded, clear. That alignment between inner and outer self creates a presence that makes the other feel seen, not judged, but accepted. In many ancient cultures, silence was the mark of wisdom. Those not easily swayed by external chaos could observe, understand, and respond rightly. Stoicism continues this spirit, turning it into a life practice. It doesn't teach escape from emotion, but mastery over it, whether pleasant or painful. This is vital in vulnerable moments like a hug, where even a slight inner disturbance can be felt deeply. When two people enter an embrace, there's a brief space before anything is defined. In that moment, if the man remains still, not rushed, not tense, not pressing, the hug becomes slow, natural, and profound. That silence is like a clean canvas, where the other can express themselves freely without being overrun or controlled. Stillness is not a communication technique. It's the fruit of self-mastery, creating space for the other to be fully themselves. The steady man doesn't seek control. He doesn't need words to lead. He leads by grounded presence. And for that reason, others are drawn, not by force, but because they feel safe. If silence is held just right in a hug, not too long to cause discomfort, not too brief to be shallow, it becomes an emotional anchor. It tells the embraced, here is someone strong, stable, awake enough to stay, to not rush, to not retreat from closeness. That anchor remains in memory, not as an event, but as a lasting emotional state, hard to name, but impossible to forget. When people speak of unspoken attraction, this is what silence brings, not from looks or routine acts, but from inner power forged over time. The unwavering man is compelling, not because he tries to impress, but because he doesn't need to. He simply is. And that completeness is what draws others in. In the end, in a world where emotion is easily swept away by social media, pressure, and speed, stillness, especially in a hug, becomes rare and valuable. It cannot be faked, copied, or rushed. It can only arise from deep self-mastery. And this is the essence of Stoicism, to become the kind of person who leaves an imprint, even in silence. 3. Resonant breathing, the silent dance of emotion. Among all the biological activities occurring constantly within us, breathing is one of the most visible and yet least consciously acknowledged. It begins with our first cry and follows us to our last breath, serving as the foundation of life. And yet, in daily life, people rarely notice their breath unless they are anxious, panicked, or exhausted. This is even more true in social interactions, especially during physical closeness, like a hug, where breath becomes an invisible bridge connecting two emotional states. In a hug, people connect not only through skin, but through heartbeat, warmth, and most significantly, breath. When two bodies draw near, the space between their breathing narrows to where it's unmistakably felt. In that space, even subtle emotional fluctuations can be transferred through breath. If someone breathes rapidly, shallowly, or unevenly, it often reflects stress, anxiety, or inner instability. In contrast, a person breathing deeply, slowly, and calmly communicates a wholly different signal, one of safety, steadiness, and peace. This is why in Stoic life philosophy, breath is more than a biological function. It is a clear sign of self-mastery. A Stoic learns to govern thought and emotion, not only through reason, but by observing and regulating breath, especially in moments requiring intense presence, such as emotional closeness. In a hug, if a man maintains low, steady breathing, he not only governs himself, but also gently influences the nervous system of the one he embraces. Modern science calls this biological synchrony, a phenomenon where two beings near each other unconsciously begin to align physiologically. Research in psychology and neuroscience shows that when two people stay close, face to face, or in an extended embrace, their heart rates and breathing rhythms tend to synchronize. This is especially evident between mothers and infants, or emotionally bonded couples. Sometimes, one person's steady breath is enough for the other to attune and match that rhythm, like a biological harmony silently playing between two minds. Within the embrace, this synchronization is more than physiology. It carries profound psychological meaning. When a woman is held by a man whose breath is calm and steady, she senses a subtle but undeniable energy, that he is not anxious, not reactive, not overrun by emotion. In the often chaotic world of romantic emotion, such steadiness creates a trust that cannot be explained in words. It doesn't come from appearance or language, but from the silent rhythm of life, breath. Synchronized breathing becomes a silent, emotional dance, where two people, without intention, establish deep emotional connection at a subconscious level. This explains why in touch-based therapies, like massage, cuddling therapy, or even spiritual rituals involving contact, The practitioner is trained to breathe steadily, gently, and mindfully. In those moments, the recipient doesn't just feel external pressure, but internal resonance, a natural, wordless connection between two nervous systems. From a scientific lens, steady breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. It reduces the sympathetic system's fight or flight response. In other words, when a man embraces while breathing deeply and slowly, he helps the woman exit states of tension or vigilance and enter a state of physical and emotional safety. From the Stoic perspective, this is a subtle yet essential form of leadership through inner steadiness. The Stoic leads not with control or instruction, but with grounded presence. And breath, seemingly simple, is a mirror of self-mastery. In a hug, if a man cannot regulate his breath, he is not truly present, not yet at peace. But if his breath is deep and stable, the other person will feel protection, presence, and understanding without a single word spoken. Ultimately, the breath during a hug becomes silent, but undeniable proof of awareness and control. It cannot be faked. The woman's body, heart, and emotional senses will instinctively perceive that rhythm. In physical closeness, language is not spoken through words, but through how we inhale, exhale, and inhabit the moment. Breath is the bridge, the current linking two inner lives, and whoever controls it creates a space of safety, connection, and unforgettable presence. Breath is an automatic physiological function, yet one of the few bodily processes we can consciously influence. This makes it a unique meeting point between unconscious and conscious, where one can actively regulate biology and emotion simply by choosing how to breathe. In Stoic teaching, breath control is not just a practice of discipline, but a reflection of a man's intention. In a moment of closeness like a hug, breath becomes a subtle signal of presence through which emotion, safety, and even understanding are conveyed without words. A Stoic man does not enter a hug unconsciously. He does not fall into reflex or silent worry. He brings breath into deliberate rhythm, deep, slow, and steady. This is not performance or manipulation, but the outward sign of inward training. Because breath is the first to waver when emotion surges. In a hug, an uneven, tense, or hurried breath immediately reveals inner unrest. When a man controls his breath in an embrace, what the woman feels is not a good hug, but complete presence. No tension, no waiting for reaction, no hidden expectations. He becomes a mirror, not projecting emotion, but reflecting calm so clearly that she can release her guard. In that space, real connection can finally take root. Intentional breath generates a unique kind of energy, unseen, but instinctively felt. That presence doesn't lie in words, but in mastering the most basic biological response. This requires deep mental training, for intimacy often stirs nervousness, expectation, or fear of rejection. Without inner preparation, breath will betray all that reason tries to hide. That's why in meditation or self-mastery systems like Stoicism, breath is central. No communication skill is effective if the mind is unstable, and no mind is stable if the breath is unsettled. A man with conscious breath doesn't need to talk much, prove himself, or dominate conversation. He simply holds the alignment between his breath and his energy and creates a subtle space where others feel accepted. Scientifically, our deliberate breathing directly affects the central nervous system, especially the brain-heart-gut axis. Slow breathing stimulates the vagus nerve, lowers heart rate, relaxes the body, and shifts the nervous system from stress to recovery. It calms not only the breather, but radiates to those close by, in this case, the one being held. Intentional breath is therefore not a private act, but a shared nervous experience, spoken without sound. In the context of a hug, this matters deeply. When a woman steps into a man's arms, she unconsciously gauges safety through many cues, one of which is breathing. If his breath is quick or erratic, she senses instability, no matter how calm his words may seem. But if his breath is slow, grounded, and tranquil, it creates an emotional territory where she can relax, let go, and feel safe in presence alone. This is how trust forms, not through promises, but through physiology. Unlike behaviors aimed at impressing or seducing, intentional breath is not outward-facing. It is inward disciplined, just as Stoics adjust their inner world not to change reality, but to change how they meet it. In the embrace, the Stoic man does not impress by holding longer or placing hands correctly, but by breathing as he lives, steadfastly, humbly, attentively, without demand. Breath is honest. You can't fake steadiness if your soul is in turmoil. You can't force depth of breath if your mind is restless. That's why breath becomes the clearest measure of presence. When a man has trained to breathe naturally, yet deliberately in intimate moments, like a hug, it shows he governs not just the moment, but himself. Such presence, though wordless, is sensed by the other as open space, where they don't need to hurry, defend, or perform. In that state, harmony doesn't form through speech, but through shared rhythm. And it is this resonance that builds lasting connection, not through vows, but through the quiet energy of presence. In the end, intentional breath is not a technique to improve hugging. It is the mark of one who has learned to live from the inside out, not shaped by circumstance, not ruled by emotion, not driven by societal expectation. In the hug, such a man needs no display. He only needs to breathe rightly. And in that breath, his presence becomes a message. I am here. I am listening. I want nothing from you, only to share this moment with you, fully. 4. Deliberate in every detail. From approach to release. In many social and emotional interactions, people tend to focus too heavily on the climactic moment, the hug, the kiss, the words, while overlooking a subtle but decisive stage, the moment of approach. It is the point when bodily signals begin to transmit, even before any words are spoken, and the physical distance between two people starts to close. In this sense, the approach is not merely a physical movement, but a form of nonverbal communication, where every step carries the weight of one's inner state. From a Stoic perspective, every action, no matter how small, ought to be performed with awareness and intention. A Stoic does not enter a situation out of impulse or emotional momentum, but through reason and inner direction. When approaching someone for an embrace, the first act is not physical touch, but establishing safety through the energy of shared space. This is conveyed through eye contact, the pace of walking, the point of pause, the openness or containment of the body, all silently communicating control, intention, and respect. Deliberate approach allows the other person to feel the act is not an intrusion, but a quiet invitation. The man steps forward not because he must, but because he has considered, chosen, and decided to act. Presence in each step is the signature of a composed interior, neither hurried nor anxious. This reflects outwardly with clarity, posture upright but not rigid, eyes soft yet grounded, steps steady, neither rushed nor hesitant. In behavioral psychology, this stage is called pre-communication, a time when two individuals begin to form their initial perceptions before physical contact. If done unconsciously, hastily, or without intention, it may provoke discomfort, anxiety, caution, or retreat. But if one approaches with control in every movement, the mere act of drawing near can already inspire a sense of trust and safety. Intentional approach also relates closely to spatial awareness, an often overlooked but vital element in human interaction. Each person has an invisible perimeter of personal space, and crossing it uninvited can register in the brain as threat. Thus, entering someone's space slowly, attentively, and responsive to their cues becomes a mark of refinement and understanding. The Stoic does not rush this process, but patiently allows the other's readiness to unfold on its own terms. In truth, it is often the approach, not the hug itself, that determines whether the other feels at ease. Even a technically perfect hug can feel awkward if preceded by a clumsy step or a strained glance. Conversely, a simple hug can leave a lasting impression when offered by someone whose presence was already composed from the moment of coming near. That approach is not just physical. It's an emotional opening, and it's as if saying without words, "I come without force. I am present, but not invasive. I am here, but you decide whether to receive me." For this reason, the pace of approach becomes critical. In a world driven by speed, where haste is mistaken for strength, the one who can remain slow and steady becomes an anchor of difference. The Stoic is not moved by the fear of missing the moment. His steps are chosen, deliberate, not to control the other, but to remain in integrity between inner state and outer action. That consistency also appears in body language: shoulders relaxed, hands calm, eyes unwavering. Seemingly small cues are the most deeply felt. When words are absent, the body becomes the entire message. If one's inner state and movements are misaligned, say eyes darting while steps feign confidence, it creates dissonance that unsettles rather than reassures. Furthermore, intentional approach builds long-term trust. A man who can draw near without threatening presence demonstrates respect for boundaries, a foundational trait for any lasting relationship. This becomes even more important today, where excessive closeness can easily be misread, creating distance instead of connection. A hug preceded by respectful approach is far more likely to become a meaningful experience. In short, the approach is not merely the first step toward a hug. It is an inseparable part of the emotional experience, where each movement, each gaze, each pause conveys a silent message about one's way of being, moral grounding, and self-command. The Stoic knows presence begins before touch ever occurs. He moves not out of emotional pressure, but from a prepared inner space ready to be shared. Every hug has a beginning and an end. If the beginning is easier to prepare, with a glance, a smile, or a slow step, the ending is harder to manage and easier to misjudge. The reason is clear. Once emotion peaks, bodies touch, and closeness intensifies, leaving that moment with grace becomes its own form of art, subtle, unannounced, yet crucial in shaping the memory that remains. In Stoicism, every act must be conscious, including the way we end an interaction. For this philosophy does not encourage indulgence and comfort at the expense of clarity. The Stoic understands that no matter how warm a hug may be, it is only a brief part of the continuous flow of now. Letting go at the right time is a sign of someone grounded in reality, not clinging, not escaping, but fully present for each passing moment. The ending of a hug, done rightly, does not close a moment, but opens a trail of emotional afterglow. Releasing a hug is not simply removing one's arms. It is a sequence of subtle cues, relaxing tension, reducing physical pressure, adjusting eye contact and a facial expression. Each detail may say, "I am here to share presence, not to possess." When a man loosens his hold naturally, not abruptly, not reluctantly, the woman feels respected, not held too tightly, nor dropped too soon. It is this gentle transition from connection to release that creates a sense of emotional wholeness. From a psychological view, ending a hug at the right time depends on reading the body's cues. Without words, people still hear intent through breath, muscle tone, or posture shifts. Someone attuned to the moment will notice when the other subtly pulls back or alters their breath, a signal of readiness to shift. Sensing that precisely is more than perception. It is the awareness of presence itself, a core Stoic trait. On the other hand, an abrupt end leaves a trace of disconnect. The body hasn't yet transitioned, emotions haven't disengaged, and the embrace is broken, like a story cut mid-sentence, leaving imbalance and uncertainty. Conversely, if held too long, a sense of pressure or control may arise. What began as care now becomes burden. In both cases, a potentially meaningful moment is undone by mistiming. The Stoic never overlooks this detail. For him, the hug is not just emotional. It reflects character, conduct, and self-control. Thus, when he lets go, it's not because time's up, but because he recognizes that the moment has fulfilled its purpose. He doesn't prolong closeness to hold on to feeling, nor end it early out of fear. He ends when both are in sync, when the energy has flowed fully, no more, no less. Refinement in ending is also seen in how one withdraws. The Stoic does not turn away hastily or step back like a task completed. He exits the embrace slowly, like a melody fading, not stopped. Sometimes, a lingering gaze after release becomes the final note that seals the entire moment. Not seductive, but simply saying, "I am still here, but I honor your space and time." Moreover, how one withdraws from a hug is a preparation for what follows. A properly concluded embrace doesn't rupture connection, but allows emotion to continue flowing. The person embraced is not left wondering what now, but gently guided back to the calm of the present. It is an invisible transition, no instruction, but more effective than words. Biologically, ending a hug on time affects the nervous system's post-contact state. When contact is just long enough, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, peaks, then tapers gradually. Done well, the hug leaves a lasting, pleasant imprint. Done too soon or too long, the nervous system may react with imbalance, like being jolted from a dream or trapped in an expired state. Thus, the art of letting go is not symbolic alone. It has practical, biological, and emotional grounding. In sum, releasing a hug is not just a physical exit. It is the framing of emotional experience, requiring awareness to feel the moment's rhythm, sensitivity, to exit gently, and strength to not be overrun by feeling. A man who can do this isn't just skilled in interaction, but has trained his inner life, where every act is born from balance, intention, and respect for reality. In a world where many know how to begin, but few know when to end, a well-timed release becomes a rare emotional signature. A woman may forget the words spoken, but she won't forget how it felt to step away from arms that neither clung nor rushed, just a presence that knew when it was enough. In today's hurried world, the hug has become more of a social reflex than a moment of true connection. That's why, when applying Stoicism to daily life, I realized that even a small act like hugging can become a profound practice in self-mastery, empathy, and conscious presence. I began by observing myself in the simplest things: how I approach someone. Am I rushed, hesitant? I learned to regulate my breath before a hug, not to appear composed, but to genuinely feel peace from within. And I paid special attention to the moment of letting go, not withdrawing, as if completing a task, but releasing like ending a piece of music, with gratitude for the connection shared. As I practiced this regularly, I noticed the relationships around me began to shift. People felt more at ease, safer in my presence. Not because I hug well, but because I was truly present. And that, to me, is the essence of living stoically. To live deliberately, to love with responsibility, to be present without imposing, and to give without attaching. If you found value in what you've heard, consider like, subscribe, and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next episodes, where we continue exploring inner strength and building a life of self-command, resilience, and deep compassion. Because sometimes true strength doesn't come from something grand, but from the way we embrace the world, in silence and with intention. I'll see you in the next video.